Chapter 1833. Is there anything we can do now? Onyxia seemed to be eager to try. Basically, we just wait. But since I'm back, you can go to the dragon's slumber temple in my place. Duque gently hooked the black dragon's little nose. Is there a fight? The black dragon looked up. Are you asking if there are weaklings for you to bully? Alright, there are. Duque smiled. Even the black dragon blushed a little. Alright, since it's master's order. Duque turned his head back. How are things on their side? When Duque attacked the Land of Fire, it wasn't that Duque didn't have time to attend to other things. It was because Uldum and Vasker were very special places. Unless Duque came personally, he couldn't just use the weave to invade them. All of a sudden, the information there was sent back to the most primitive way of sending messengers. In the end, Jaina was in charge of summarizing the information. It's the final battle. Over in Uldum, Torver's lost city and the Hall of Origins have been settled. Aurelia and Sasha have already brought people to support Sylvanas. Brian Bronzebeard was the only one left in charge of the Hall of Origins. Sister Vasker said that she found 2 new demigods and is preparing to recruit them. At the same time, she has already attacked the tidal throne and is fighting against the sea monster sect leader Azamat. Jaina finished her report and added, "Should we send reinforcements?" Duque hesitated for a second but still shook his head. No, since they chose to be independent, they should show their courage. They chose their own path and they have to finish it even if they have to kneel. There was something else Duque didn't say. Unless they ask for reinforcements themselves? Duque raised his head and looked into the distance. He was silent for a long time. If they are willing to be the beautiful canaries in the cage, Duke does not mind giving them a crook of an arm to protect them from the storm. But they weren't just his women. They were also great heroes who shouldered the fate of the elves and led them into the future. Perhaps it was because of this persistence that the Windrunner sisters' beauty was so extraordinary and captivating. Jaina asked softly, before the Stonewall continent merges with Azeroth, is there anything else we can do apart from providing disaster relief and restoring production? Duque shook his head. Wait and hope. Duque really didn't interfere. If Queen Syriana couldn't deal with Al'Akir, who was known as AWOL Trash, and Vashj couldn't deal with a sea monster suzerain, then how could he expect them to block the Burning Legion's attacks in his territory again and again in the future? Deep into the night, Duque was still anxious. Through the portal, Duque took out a large stack of reports from the Alliance and started to deal with them in the study room that Jaina had left for him. Every queen has her own bedroom and study in her own palace, or in her own summer palace. This was a form of respect and an honor. Duque accepted it very calmly. Hundreds of mages' eyes were reviewing the reports, and even more mages' hands were flipping through these reports. Just like that, Duque lay comfortably on the armchair behind the desk and let his spirit browse through the massive amount of reports. This wasn't something a human could do. Fortunately, Duque was no longer a mortal. Knock knock. There was a knock on the door. Come in. Even without asking, Duque knew that it was Onyxia at the door just from the soul connection. It was rare that the Black Dragon Princess actually came wearing a high-slit cheongsam tonight. The slit that reached to the waist showed the vacuum state under the cheongsam. A dignified dragon but walking like a cat. She climbed over gracefully and went under the desk in front of Duque. Well, it was one of the daily dragon taming lessons, dragon spitting pearls. For Duque's convenience, Onyxia even made a pair of interesting black dragon horns on her head, which could be used as handles. There was another knock on the door. Jaina, who came in on her own, glanced at the humanoid black dragon princess under the desk. Without saying anything, she simply came up and waved her finger, and the pile of files was moved away by 2 additional hands of magic. Hey, Duque, I miss you. Faced with his beautiful disciple, Duque put on a serious face. Well, it seems that it's been a while since I discussed the academic problem of the reactions of different individual magic circuits in joint situations with you. Jaina winked. Master, please enlighten me. So, Duque changed from Hors to Ors 7. While Duque waited for the progress with his mount in his left hand and a certain queen in his right hand, the Horde's attack on the Twilight Fortress finally came to an end. After all the hardships and the loss of almost 400,000 Horde soldiers, the elites led by Garush finally faced the last leader of the Twilight Fortress, the great traitor Gujar. If Gujar were still a simple 2-headed ogre, brainless Roar probably could have cut him into pieces on his own. As a boss-level expert who had been greatly strengthened by the ancient god Enzoth, Gujar became a huge problem. Corruption of the ancient god, corruption, acceleration, corruption, plague, corruption, distortion, corruption, absolute, before him, everybody had to face a cruel test of willpower. The skill, betrayal, tempted every weak-willed warrior to worship Gujar on the spot and raise their battle axes to their companions a moment ago. The corruption of the ancient god, on the other hand, forced him to become a fallen one through all kinds of dark methods. When the corruption reached the second level of plague, he couldn't help but vomit, causing shadow damage to all his companions who were sprayed by the vomit. When the third level of distortion happened, he would automatically cause group shadow arrow damage to his companions around him. Finally, when absolute came, he would become a powerful warrior and increase his attack power by 100%, but it also meant death. When his companions betrayed him for no reason, Garush chose to kill them. When the old orc Eitrig, Thrall's advisor and expert, entered the distortion state, Garush also shouted, "Traitor!" He cut off the head of Eitrig, who was about to leave the team and was about to die by himself. The other chief's eyes were bloodshot. However, in the face of a great enemy, they could only endure the displeasure in their hearts and continue to attack Gujar. After a fierce battle, Garush finally cut off the two heads of the traitor ogre. The problem was that he put Gujar's head together with Eitrig's. Hang the heads of these three traitors on the main gate of Orgrimmar, Garush ordered. Chapter 1834. For some reason, Sinestra, who should have existed in the deepest part of the Twilight Fortress, was no longer there. From this point of view, it could be concluded that the Horde had finally won the war at a heavy price. But Garush's actions had undoubtedly completely ignited the conflict between him and the other chiefs. No, Eitrig is definitely not a traitor. Everyone saw that it was Google's vicious skill. Are you saying that a warrior profession can use shadow arrow? Wajin roared, and he opened his arms fiercely. I didn't ask for your opinion, trolls. Garush said contemptuously. I agree with Dworkin. Eitrig didn't want to attack us. Drano stood up, his burly figure even more oppressive than Dworkin's slightly thin figure. Garush was not happy. He pointed his left hand at the tip of Drano's nose, almost poking the forgotten leader's nose. Shut up. I don't need a dead man to influence my decision. It was I, Garush Hellscream, who led the Horde to win this war against the traitors. I am the only one who will be the victor of this war. Remember, dead face. In the Horde, only the winner has the final say. After saying that, he fiercely slapped the strong pectoral muscles on his chest, making loud banging sounds. Sparse cheers could be heard from the surroundings, but even more people were silent. Garush's eye deeply stung everyone present. Not only the tribal chiefs, but even many of the elite beastmen who were clustered around the periphery felt that the word was rather harsh. Next to him, Cain, who was covered in blood from the battle just now, strode over regardless of the wounds on his body. The huge totem pole slammed into the ground, making a deafening noise and raising a lot of dust. Garush, what did you say? Are you saying that you are the only winner? Then what about the hundreds of thousands of soldiers sacrificed for this battle? Were those orcs cannon fodder? Were more than half of our Tauren trolls and Forsaken warriors just stepping stones for your prestige? The Tauren chief, who was as huge as a hill, stood in front of Garush, looking down at the great chief who was shorter than him. Garush already hated the feeling of having to look up to someone. Unexpectedly, Cain was so angry that he sprayed saliva in Garush's face. Any qualified leader with a bit of political sense would never say something like this. However, the reason why Garush was called the Brainless Roar by many alliances was because of his 5 IQ and his personality of speaking without thinking when he was angry. Garush's first reaction after being spat on was to punch Cain in the bull's mouth. It was a powerful, swift, and ruthless left hook. Every tribe leader present saw that the old bull's slightly long face had been beaten until it was deformed. Even the muscles on the right side of his face had received a fierce blow to his gums. At least 3 of his teeth had been knocked out. His huge teeth flew out of his mouth along with the stench of blood. The old bull was a bit stunned. Then words that made him even angrier rang in his ears. It was Garush's terrifying declaration. Pay attention to your identity, Cain. You Taurens are just vassals of us orcs. The tribe will always be decided by the orcs, and I am the great chief of the orcs. I am also the great chief of the tribe. Those who don't listen to the great chief's orders can die. Cain looked up and was shocked to see Garush making a throat-cutting gesture at him with his thick right thumb. Long-term injustice. Long-term suppressed anger. The humiliation he had suffered during this period of time. Everything was like a volcano that had been suppressed to the extreme and had to erupt. It erupted in Cain's heart. If the Taurens were a race that Thrall had conquered in war, perhaps Cain would choose to lower his head. But that wasn't the case. The tribe used an integration system similar to the alliance. In the tribe's declaration, the status of the various races was equal. Even though the orcs in the tribe were numerous and powerful, allowing the orcs to occupy an absolute ruling position, the tribe's declaration did state that other races could challenge the great chief's ruling authority. At this moment, Cain could no longer care about anything else. The Tauren chief pulled out the flag on his back and threw it in front of Garush. According to the tribe's tradition, I, Cain Bloodhoof, request to challenge you for the position of great chief. Come. If you really think you are the tribe's #1 warrior, then accept my Makara. Garush's face turned green and then red. Suddenly he roared and stomped on one of Kujar's heads. I've had enough. I've had enough. I've had enough of your complaints. I've had enough of your weakness. Why can't you weaklings obediently listen to the orders of the strong? Don't compare me to that weak fellow thrall. He has already scrammed. Now the great chief of the tribe is me, Garush Hellscream. Garush raised his bloody axe high. I accept Cain's challenge. Who else wants to challenge me? Is it you? Is it you? Or is it you? If you want to come, then come at me together. As he spoke, the blade of his axe was first pointed at Cain, then at Wajin, then at Dranos and finally at the goblin prince Galawex. Wajin was not as impulsive as Cain, but everyone could see that his protruding fangs were trembling with anger. Garush, I don't want to fight with you. When you and Cain's Makara are over, I will make my decision. Wajin clenched his fists tightly. Anyone with a brain knew that unless Garush was completely defeated and Cain replaced him as the new great chief, it would mean that the tribe would split. A week later at the south gate of Orgrimmar, which was opposite the main gate, there was a huge pit with a diameter of more than a kilometer formed due to the cataclysm. Tens of thousands of tribal warriors formed a huge circle, and at the bottom of the pit were the challengers and the challenged of Makara. Cain was the first to shout, Garush, I will defeat you. Under your leadership the tribe will surely be destroyed. Ow ow ow, Garush brandished his sharp axe. First, he roared at the sky, showing everyone his amazing lung capacity. The wild and primitive roar even suppressed the sound waves of tens of thousands of people for a moment. Then the young orcs from Nagrand burst into even more enthusiastic cheers. This was their idol, the strong orc that they dreamed of, the role model. No matter what, the one who could lead them to victory was a great hero. Chapter 1835. Perhaps some people criticized Gurus for sacrificing too many of his compatriots for this war. But in the eyes of the traditional orcs, so what? Those who died were the weak. The weak were not qualified to have glory, power, and land. Gurus. Great hero Gurus. It was an earth-shattering cheer, a wild roar, and the shock of tens of thousands of people worshipping him. Garush raised his arms high. He loved the feeling of standing at the pinnacle of power and glory. He raised his father's single-edged axe, Bloodhowl, and waved it a few times. Although he hated his father, who bowed to the human leader, Duke Marcus, he reluctantly approved of his father's actions. At the same time he felt that Bloodhowl was indeed useful. Of course, he didn't feel anything about his father using a knockoff version of Bloodhowl that he had gotten from a certain demon prince in Karazhan after someone gave him a family heirloom axe. As for feeling the so-called fatherly love, the brave orcs didn't need fatherly love, at least that was what he thought. Gurus pointed at Cain from afar and shouted, Cain, I'll give you one last chance. Admit your identity as the weak and kneel in front of me. Bah! Don't even think about it. Under your leadership, the horde will only be destroyed. Cain retorted. In the temporary auditorium near the arena, other than Gruul, who had an indifferent expression, the other chiefs all had nervous expressions. Cain's son, Bane, clenched his fists. As the military commander of the horde, Varrock Salyafar didn't want to see this happen, but he knew that the conflict had been completely intensified and could no longer be resolved through dialogue. Makara might be the only way to resolve the dispute outside of a civil war. With a deep sigh, the white-haired old orc commander raised his right hand high and put it down heavily. I declare that Cain Bloodhoof's challenge to Gurus Hellscream's Makara begins. The taller and bullier Tauren chief was undoubtedly the strongest MT of the horde. Ever since Sar led the orcs west to the Kalimdor continent, Cain had been active at the forefront of the war. Since the famous Battle of Mount Hyjal, his majestic figure had been imprinted in the eyes of every horde powerhouse, and he had never retreated. His bravery and strength were obvious to all. In fact, as soon as the battle began, he completely overwhelmed Garush. Bang! With the exact same fierce charge, The two warrior heroes turned into a stream of light that was hard to be seen by the naked eye and crashed into each other in the middle of the arena. It was the same move, but it was a clash without any fancy tricks. Naturally, the stronger side would win. Facing Cain, who weighed more than a ton and also had innate divine strength, Garush was sent flying. Today in the duel, Cain did not use his favorite totem pole. Instead, he used a long axe that was more suitable for his hands. Without giving Garush any time to react, Cain activated Spirit's Wrath, and then used Heroic Leap to catch up with Garush, who was flying backwards, and swung his axe down. Close combat. An inch shorter was an inch more dangerous. The price of gaining agility was that the side with a longer attack range would have an advantage. Therefore, there was another saying that an inch longer was an inch more powerful. The Oxhead Chief was already stronger to begin with. Coupled with his full strength, the axe that came down from above forced Garush to forcefully parry it with Blood Howl in midair. Bang! It was a fierce blow that shook the entire arena. Garush was sent flying like a cannonball. First, he crashed to the ground, then his entire body bounced up again under the impact. Finally, he rolled 5 times in a sorry state, plowing a thick line on the thick red ground before he finally stopped. Ah! There was an uproar among the beastmen, while the Taurens, Trolls, and Forsaken cheered. Garush, surrender! Cain roared. Garush used Blood Howl to support his body and said angrily, Cain, you've angered me. Then I'll beat you until you submit. Cain rushed over with large strides, raised his battle axe, and launched a fierce attack. It was an unquestionable suppression. In terms of experience, 10 Garushes could not compare to Cain. In terms of strength and equipment, Cain also completely defeated Garush. The Oxhead Chief was at the strongest moment of his life. Be it experience or physique, he was at his peak. Compared to him, Garush was too inexperienced. At some point in time, the beastmen's cheers had stopped. They stared at the brownish-red figure that was being suppressed with ugly expressions. At this moment, Garush was more of a defensive fighter than Cain. Of course, as a member of the Hellscream family, Garush had learned 70% to 80% of Lord Howl's jump slash. Seizing an opportunity, Garush fiercely counterattacked from the bottom up, finally using his axe to block Cain's battle axe. Garush seized the opportunity and jumped high. Because only then could he make up for the difference in height and physique between him and Cain, and better hit Cain's head. He wanted to chop down this Oxhead Chief who had embarrassed him. Unfortunately, he was too inexperienced and the jumping route he chose was not good. Almost at the instant he jumped, Cain's left hand grabbed his leg and slammed him to the ground in a wrestling position. Garush spat out a mouthful of blood from the violent impact with the ground. This was only the beginning. Cain was like a broken cloth bag. He continued to grab Garush's foot and continued to smash him violently. Left throw, right throw, left throw, right throw. Cain, who was swinging his arms, directly humiliated the current chief with absolute strength. Garush was thrown so hard that the world spun and he could not hold on any longer. At this moment, he waved Blood Howl randomly as if he had hit something. That's right. The tip of the axe blade had indeed slashed across Cain's chest. There were over 100 wounds on his body, and Cain, who was injured in almost every battle, did not think much of this injury. However, he immediately realized that his chest was violently numb, followed by an unbearable feeling of suffocation. Cain let go of Garush's leg and touched the wound on his chest. He saw that a considerable part of his blood had turned green. He realized what it was. Poison? Cain's eyes widened, and this scene was witnessed by Cain's son Ben. Just as Cain's entire body was almost paralyzed, the furious Garush pounced over. The red battle axe he raised high emitted a demonic scarlet light. Father, no! Ben cried out in shock. It was too late. Cain, who was poisoned, could not move at all. As the axe chopped down, thunderous cheers erupted among the orcs. Garush raised Cain's head high and let out a victorious roar. Chapter 1836. Not many people could understand what had just happened. Because of the distance and vision, everyone only saw that Cain was indeed suppressing Garush, but at the last moment, Garush directly killed Cain. The wild cheers of the crowd covered everything, including Bane's shout, "Poison! Garush's axe is poisonous. That despicable guy murdered my father." Did anyone hear that? Yes, all the Taurens around, including Wajin, Varrock, Dranos, Garavix and others not far away, heard it. Although every orc around them was cheering and roaring, at least they all noticed this scene. The duel just now was definitely unreasonable. There was a huge conspiracy behind it. Delano jumped off the arena and flipped over Cain's body while suppressing the unhappiness in his heart. He immediately saw the green venom on Kane's chest and the strange green color on the edge of the great chief's blood roar. Wuxia stared at this scene, then he suddenly turned his head and shouted, "Varrock Salyafar." Wuxia called out a name. He not only called Varrock, who was the notary, but also the warlord who held the core military power of the tribe. Only Varrock was qualified to declare this a shameful makara, and only he could redress Kane's grievances. Varrock's mouth squirmed for a long time, but in the end he could not spit out a word. Declare this duel invalid? Easy. This kind of obvious evidence, as long as he shouted at Varrock, would be able to prove it immediately. But what about after that? Garush was bound to be despised by the entire tribe, and then who would lead the tribe? There was no talent in the tribe who could be the great chief. Although Garush was reckless, he at least killed the traitor and won. Except for him, no one could suppress the current young orcs. Perhaps it was a mistake to let him continue to be the chief, but who would dare to say that they would be able to lead the tribe out of this desperate predicament? Wuxia? No, his identity as a troll was a huge problem. He could not suppress these young orcs. And although Garush had a bad personality, his personal strength was definitely the best in the tribe. Unless it was Gruul, no one, including Woking, could beat him in Makarali. Thousands of thoughts flashed through his mind. In the end he sighed and lowered his head. Workin understood, and he did not blame Varrock for his choice. There was only endless sorrow. He turned around and walked past Bane, patting the next leader of the Tauran tribe who had witnessed his father being murdered. One day we will make Garush pay for this blood debt. Without waiting for Bane to respond, Wuxia left the dueling field. The poison was not done by Garush, but by Magatha Grim Totem. But that was no longer important. That night, Garush decided to hold a banquet in Agrima and hung Kane's head on the city gate. Everything was blamed on Garush. That same night, Woken found Varrock, took out an oath written on wyvern skin and declared to him, "From this moment on, I, Woken, on behalf of the Darkspear Trolls, officially declare our peaceful departure from the tribe in accordance with the terms of the declaration made with Chief Sar. If Garush chooses to advance, we, the Darkspear Trolls, will wait for the war in the Echo Islands. Of course, you can also raise your axe to me at this moment, and I will respond with my spear." Varrock was stunned, his lips trembling. Is this necessary? You have made your choice. The Darkspear Trolls have also made their choice. That's all. Without accepting any persuasion, Woken left Varrock standing alone in the chieftain's hall. What was even more shocking was that almost immediately after, Dranos also found Varrock. The Forsaken have announced their departure from the tribe. No, this is not true. I used to be an orc and you used to be my father. But I am already dead, and the dead are not qualified to have the same rights as the living, are they? Garush didn't think much of me anyway. But I am now the leader of the Forsaken, and I have to be responsible for my people. So be it, father, if you can't stay. Welcome to Winterspring. Or like our chieftain's father, Grom, you can rely on Duke Marcus. For you, that is also a good choice. Ignoring his father, who was completely speechless, Delanos used his ice-cold body to hug his father, who still had blood flowing and body temperature, then threw down an oath and left proudly. That night, the goblins and Taurans also announced their departure. Garrawek said in his sharp voice, "I don't mind owing people money, but I really mind being owed money. The tribe owes me too much money. Sir can't pay it back, Garush doesn't want to pay it back at all and wants my life. The Rustwater conglomerate is finished with the tribe. You want the Rustwater conglomerate to return to the tribe? Yes, pay us the money you owe first." Ben said resolutely, "This is an unfair duel. The Taurans do not recognize Cairn Bloodhoof's glorious death. The Taurans have no intention of fighting against the tribe, but if the tribe chooses to attack Mulgore, the Taurans will fight to the end at Thunder Cliff." Overnight the tribe fell apart. When Varrock handed the 4 contracts to give up the tribe's identity to Garush, who woke up with a hangover the next morning, Garush lost his temper on the spot. Betrayal. This is a shameless betrayal. Who gave them the right to betray the tribe? Garush flew into a rage on the spot. Varrock was unmoved. This was set by the previous chieftain, Sar, when he pulled the 4 major races into the tribe. At that time all the chieftains of the tribe signed the agreement, including me representing the Blackstone clan, Sar representing the Frostwolf clan, and Grom representing the Warsong clan, which is your father. Back then, every chieftain agreed that all races were equal and had the right to leave peacefully as long as the tribe was not in a state of war. Garush clutched his slightly painful head. Isn't the tribe in a state of war now? Who ordered it to be lifted? It's you, chieftain. After you killed Cairn Bloodhoof, You personally announced this decision in front of thousands of orcs at the banquet last night, Varrock said in a deep voice. Garush's face suddenly turned red. He did not admit his fault, but instead vented his anger on the few chieftains. In any case, abandoning the tribe without permission is betrayal. I want to punish those who dare to leave the tribe behind my back. Garush waved his bloody roar. As the chieftain, of course you have the right to declare war. Remember, if you do this, it means that you are declaring war on the 4 major races at the same time, and they are very likely to fall to the alliance. The most important thing is that we neither have a ship to the Echo Islands nor enough food to support an army of more than 100,000 to attack any other race. Varrock retorted coldly. Chapter 1837. By the way, the Kodo, which was the best at carrying things, had also been brought back by the Minotaurs. The Horde could only rely on hard labor. Or use werewolves to pull the carts. Garush was stunned. Didn't I order for the barren lands to be hunted? Varrock said, the barren lands don't have enough prey to support an army of 500,000. Even if the Great Rift Valley is an oasis, it won't do. In the later stages of the game, our hunters would have to travel more than 50 miles to hunt every day. To put it bluntly, the Alliance was waiting for the Horde to start a war. Varrock had sworn that no matter who the chief was, he would obey the orders of the one in the position. The brave beastmen would always keep their oaths. He was very satisfied with the beastmen's sense of supremacy. If the Horde did not listen to a single warning, he would immediately kill them. After more than 3 hours, the 4 women were finally taken care of. Duque, who was hugging one on each side, opened a bottle of 1982 Sprite. Kalia was a little confused. She tilted her head. Is that so? Ilucia, who was lying on the chaise longue, laughed. I knew it. In the business world, Duque, what you've been doing all this time is stealing raw materials. If you really want the Horde to be good, you should do what we did to help Kalia. Not only should we buy raw materials, but we should also build railways and factories in the places of production. We can also improve the local industry while doing fine processing. Garush was furious that the 4 leaders had left without saying goodbye. He did look down on the other races, but that did not mean he did not enjoy the pleasure of commanding them. Everyone? Jaina was stunned. But would the beastmen dare? The Horde has endured long enough. For 12 years, Duque, who had been advocating cooperation between the Alliance and the Horde in public and in private, finally admitted his attitude towards the Horde in private for the first time. After Garush came to power and tore up the trade treaty with the Alliance immediately started a Cold War. Duque opened a portal and went to several places. He dragged Kalia from Lordaeron, Ilucia from South Sea City, and Tyron from Mount Hyjal. Even worse, he could not find a place to rob even if he wanted to. Actually, it was not as if there were none. The most prosperous places in Orgrimmar were Azhara and Grey Valley. Ah, good news. Great news. Dooku was beaming with joy. Such a big event, we should find everyone to celebrate. Most of the time, Garush felt that the Tauren and Trolls were troublesome races that only gave him complaints about not being able to live. When they did leave the tribe, Garush immediately became angry again. The irascible Garush did not give up and asked for several methods, all of which were mercilessly rejected by Varrock. When Varrock reported this to Garush, the great tribal chief flew into a rage. His violent temper made every beastman who had no choice but to enter the great tribal chief's hall tremble with fear. Tyron was a little curious. Duke, did you want to destroy the Horde from the start, or did you change your mind midway and go against the Horde? In the end, he still suppressed his anger. Duque used his free hand to hold Tyron's Mount Hyjal as he said honestly, from the start, I wanted to destroy the Horde. Unfortunately, I've never succeeded. Everything is decided by the times. He blurted out, so many of us have died. Why is there no food left? Only the Orc tribe was left, and they had no food or resources at all. Of course, in this life, because Duque tricked Jaina in advance, her young heart suffered the most indelible blow. Jaina, who was known as fair trade with the tribe, had always been like Duque. On the surface she acted like a good person, but in private she never gave up on scheming against the tribe. Without airships there would be no large-scale transportation. Oh no. Duque had probably opened a bottle of fruit wine that the Night Elves had stored for 82 years with a special method and poured himself a full cup. Last night the goblins had retreated. What made Varrock despair was that the Rustwater Consortium had taken away all the valuable things made by the goblins, such as the hot air balloon airships that connected Orgrimmar to other places. The only thing that made Varrock feel lucky was that Garush seemed to know the gap between them and the Alliance. He did not dare to start a war with the Alliance. Otherwise he would really be looking for death. On the other side, when Duque, who was waiting for news from Odom and Vastur, suddenly heard that the horde had split up, Duque did not say anything. He hugged Jaina happily and spun a few times on the spot. This was because she was the one that Duque had tortured the most. Almost every inch of her skin was planted with strawberries. He wanted to go on an expedition to destroy races like the Trolls and Tauren, but was told that there was no food. This surprised him. I couldn't hold it in. Duque pretended to be stupid. Varrock said coldly, "Great Chief, we need food to fight a war. Our methods of transporting and storing food are too backward. For every bag of food we transport to the Barren Lands, we will lose 3 bags of food along the way. In order to destroy Gujar, Orgrimmar's granaries are almost empty." This caused the horde's control over the various regions to drop by several levels. These words were nothing to a traditional orc, but they pierced deeply into Varrock Salufar's heart. For a moment, old Varrock almost wanted to pull out his axe and give this idiotic chief a good beating. In order to deal with the invasion of the Firelands, the Dalajan had already arrived at Mount Hyjal. The Alliance had stationed troops in Grey Valley, Azhara, and Theramor's Dustwallow Swamp. Among the 4 women, Jaina had the most complicated relationship with the Horde in history. Before Theramore was hit by the magic bomb, focusing Rainbow, Jaina had a very long honeymoon period with the Horde. Jaina, who was said to have sold her father out, had a very good relationship with her rumored male friend, Thrall, which caused her father trouble. The Wyverns alone could not meet the speed and quantity of transportation. The Horde did not have a railway, so all transportation would return to the more primitive era of animal power. When Duque brought all the harem he could find to Karazhan's bedroom, Duque laughed and began to break the armor of the women. Where the Duke Divine Sword was, the terrifying scene of 999 consecutive strikes shocked everyone present. "Oh, if you didn't say it, I would have thought that you, Duke Marcus, were a selfless hero who only cared about the public. But that's good, it proves that I didn't misjudge you. By the way, why are you purposely tormenting me?" Jaina also held a glass of wine, but she glared at Duque with dissatisfaction. Chapter 1838. Lucia burst into laughter. "Silly queen, it's fortunate that the man you're with is Duque. Otherwise you'd still be counting the money after being sold." Kalia was dissatisfied. "If it wasn't for Duque forcing me, I wouldn't have wanted to be the queen. I might even become the #1 adventurer in the Alliance, as well as a professional cleric in the Alliance's hero group." Kalia's words made sense and Lucia was defeated. The 2 girls immediately became a ball of fun. That beautiful spring scenery. Duque almost wanted to end his time as a sage and have some fun with someone else. Jaina stopped him. "Let's talk business first. Otherwise, I won't be able to feel at ease." "All right." Duque was a little disappointed. "Don't be like this, teacher. I'll do whatever you want with the students later. Answer my question first." Duque perked up. "All right. How are we going to face the Horde?" Jaina asked. Duque thought for a moment. "First of all, the Alliance must continue to maintain a lukewarm attitude towards the big tribes in a broad sense. If the tribe is divided today, Wajin will leave the tribe with his subordinates, and we will immediately rush to the Echo Islands at night, make some promises or put some race under our protection. The Alliance will be at a disadvantage." "Oh." Even a veteran politician like Tyron was surprised, much less a political noob like Kalia. Jaina blinked. "Are you afraid that the tribe will think that the division of the tribe is a conspiracy of the Alliance?" Duque shook his head. "No. Most importantly, even though Brainless Roar had torn the tribe apart, the tribe's cohesion were still there. If Garush had killed Thrall in the duel yesterday, I might consider doing it right away. But as long as the tribe is not rotten to the bone, once Sao returns, the tribe will reform into a fist." "Isn't it a good chance now?" Jaina asked. Duque sighed. "It's a chance, but it's not enough. Our alliance is too strong and gives the tribes too much pressure. As long as there was any sign of trouble in the alliance, even if the 5 tribes had irreconcilable internal conflicts, they would immediately unite again. And the key is that the alliance still lacks a righteous cause." Tyron nodded. "Yes, the alliance is indeed not a violent organization. The alliance clearly lacked a reason to wipe out the entire tribe. However, would Garush give the alliance such a reason? His brain wasn't good, but he shouldn't be that crazy, right? At least he hasn't declared war on the alliance yet. No, I think maybe everyone underestimated his stupidity. Of course, it's just that he doesn't have the chance now. When he does." Duque scrutinized it. In this life the tribe was even more chaotic than before, and the division was even more severe. In the end it was because Duque's own arrangements over the years had taken effect. He commanded the alliance to suppress the Horde's expansion, causing the Horde's territory to shrink by at least half. At the very least, the Tirisful woodland was no longer controlled by Undercity, and the Long Song forest was no longer controlled by the Blood Elves led by Lord Thema. With less territory, the corresponding resources were far less than in history. Naturally, their ability to resist pressure was even worse. In order to ensure the survival of the Beastmen, Gurus consumed the population and completely plundered the resources of the other 4 races for the Beastmen to use. Naturally, the backlash was even greater. It could be said that in this matter the Alliance had already gained the absolute upper hand. Unfortunately, Nisario did not die, and Brainless Roar did not further seek death. Duque wanted the Alliance to make a move, but it was still lacking a little bit. Although he was happy, Duque could only suppress the ecstasy in his heart and not announce anything to the public. At this time Kalia said a little strangely, "Yes, speaking of which, you've also accepted Sister Iral. Why didn't you call her for your secret celebration, Duque?" Duque had a strange look on his face. It was Jaina who giggled and said, "Of course we have to find her for the celebration, but there are many things that can't be told to her. If she knows all the Drini I will know." Indeed, Hoof was a little mature. Unfortunately, she still had the mentality of a typical young girl. Anything good in one's heart could never be hidden from the people around them. It was such a big thing that Duque wanted to secretly deal with the Horde. It was good enough that the various tight-lipped queens knew about it. Even if all the participants of the Throne Council had a tacit understanding, some things should not be announced in advance. At this time Hoof sent a magic message, Duque, I heard that the Horde has split. Don't say anything, come over immediately, I have something important to inform you." When Hoof stepped out of the portal, Duque did not say anything and directly pointed his sword at Hoof. After a round of Duque's 999 godly swords, the 4 women even came up to help put down Hoof, causing Hoof to exhale more than it inhaled. Then Duque slowly informed Hoof that his attitude towards the Horde was to wait and see. The butterfly effect caused by Duque the butterfly had really changed Azeroth too much. Originally in history the cataclysm should have been Sal's most glorious moment. Sal, who had been promoted to the Shaman of Salvation because of the cataclysm, should have been widely praised throughout the entire world and received the greatest recognition from the Sleeping Dragon Temple. Unfortunately, with Duque's existence, it seemed that there was nothing for Sal to do. At this moment, in Nagrand, Sal, who was wholeheartedly practicing the way of Shaman, suddenly received news from the Spirit of the Earth. What? Duque killed the Fire Demon King Ragnaros and officially replaced it as the Supreme Lord of the Fire Elemental world? And forced all Fire Elemental creatures to serve the Alliance mages first? Sal's heart was like a level 12 hurricane. Because the broken planet Draenor, where Nagrand was located, was too far away from planet Azeroth, in the absence of special magic communication, it was normal to rely on the elemental spirit to transmit the news for such a long time. He felt terrible in his heart. He gave up his power and left the Horde, of course, because he was forced by the political situation. What he really wanted was to protect the world of Azeroth, to become a demigod, and to gain the recognition of him and the tribe from the Sleeping Dragon Temple. At least in the general trend, he would not be left behind by the Alliance. Otherwise, if every world-destroying event had nothing to do with the tribe, and if the Alliance really wanted to attack the tribe, the Long Sleep God Temple and the Protectors would definitely stand by and watch or even help the Alliance. At that time the Horde would really be finished. But Duque sitting on the throne of the King of Fire was definitely destroying Sal's plan. The way of Shaman was to communicate with the elemental spirit, which was a relationship of request. It was absolutely different from Duque's, "I'm the Emperor, you do whatever I want you to do." Duque made the Fire Elementals serve the Alliance first. To put it bluntly, in the future the Shamans of the Horde would not be able to use Fire Elementals to attack the Alliance. Otherwise they would turn around and burn the Shamans first. This feeling of being stuck at the source was like being strangled by a rope that could pull you up and hang you at any time. Chapter 1839. This is bad. Duque will definitely let Sylvanas, who is already a demigod of wind, deal with Alakir, and let Vashj, who is also a demigod, enter the Throne of Tides. If all 3 elements are controlled by the Alliance. Thrall did not dare to continue imagining it. No. I have to change direction. The priority should be the Earth. This is my last chance to overtake them. Thrall was unknowingly getting a little impatient. He did not realize that impatience was the worst thing to do when it came to the Earth. Due to the lack of information, Thrall did not realize that there was a mortal called Magni Bronzebeard who was already so much ahead of him in the path of the earth. While Thrall was getting impatient, Duque was enjoying the clumsy pillow talk. "Duque, let me tell you. Beastmen are all brutal fellows, sob sob sob. Don't talk, savor it," Duque said righteously as he pressed down on her head and held her horn. Hoof rolled her eyes but could only bury her head in her work. Hearing that the tribe was splitting, the Draenei, who had a deep hatred for the Beastmen, naturally had other thoughts. So-called forgiveness was bullsh** t to the middle and lower class Draenei. "You killed my entire family. Do you expect me to say long live forgiveness and wait for you to kill me?" Duque saw Hoof's clumsy but hard work and gave her some hope. "Before the crisis of the world's destruction is over, the Alliance will not make any moves." At least he managed to appease Hoof and the Draenei. Anyway, those who understood would naturally understand. The key was that Duque did not say anything from start to end. After the tribe split, Duque waited bitterly for 3 days before he finally received the first piece of good news. As a demigod of the Azeroth weave, Duque was extremely sensitive to changes in the elements. After all, the biggest access points for the elements in the weave were fire and ice. The fire element flowed unimpeded, and the weave could receive as much as the fire elemental world overflowed. There was no need to be too serious in monitoring the fluctuations of the water element. Before this moment arrived, the supply of water elements was unstable. Tidehunter Neptulin had never communicated with Duque. Ever since Duque established the weave, he had been walking the path of Hydraxia's water elementals. It wasn't very generous, but at least Duke Hadasis could give him a 5% share. Suddenly, Duque was pleasantly surprised to find that the share had jumped from 5% to 51%. In the next second, the magic communication with Vashj that had been blocked for a long time returned to normal. In the magic mirror, Vashj's long red hair fluttered in the deep sea, giving off a mysterious and hazy beauty. She respectfully crossed her arms on her shoulders and bowed towards Duque on the other side of the screen. Then she transmitted her soul voice. "Dear Master, your most loyal servant, Celia, did not disappoint you. In the tidal throne, she slew the king of sea monsters, Azamat, and saved the water elemental lord, Tidehunter Neptulin. After my persuasion, Neptulin is now willing to follow me and serve you as the supreme ruler. Well done, my Celia. When you come back, I will reward you well." This conversation contained too many hidden words from both sides. Vashj clearly referred to herself as a demigod in all public occasions. But in front of Duque, she would always be the little maid that Duque saved in Azhara's palace. And Duque called her, my Celia. This kind of recognition was the biggest reward for Vashj. There seemed to be some kind of liquid in the water from the corner of Vashj's eyes. That should be tears. There was another image in the magic mirror, and it immediately switched to Neptulin. Neptulin was a huge humanoid creature, almost 10 stories tall, similar to Lager. He had a dark blue humanoid upper body and a cone-like water elemental lower body, as if he was wearing a skirt. He had an almost rectangular face and hair that looked like 5 curved pieces of blue marble inlaid on it. A sapphire the size of a carriage hung on a huge golden chain. It looked very strange. He was not in good condition because he had just been tortured by the sea monster lord. Huge whip marks and sucker bite marks could be seen all over his hard body, which looked a little like blue marble. Of course, Duque also saw the scars of swords and arrows. The scene made Duque want to laugh. Needless to say, this was the mark of Vashj, persuading Neptulin on behalf of Duque. Among the 4 elemental lords, Neptulin was famous for his wisdom. During the ancient war of the Dark Empire 25,000 years ago, Neptulin the Tidehunter was always on guard against Al-Akir's treacherous schemes. He also controlled his subordinates to prevent them from attacking the stronghold of Sarazen the Mother of Stone. When the armies of fire, wind, and earth fought each other on the land of Azeroth, the Tidehunter would cleverly divide and conquer his enemies. Every time the enemy tried to flee, Neptulin would sweep away the waves so high that even the tallest mountain in Salazarn would feel ashamed of itself. Neptulin liked to play with his prey, dragging them into the water and letting them escape. Sometimes he would banish an unfortunate victim to an isolated island and let him enjoy the torment of the tides and whirlpools. He would usually try to identify who could not survive in the water for a long time and drag them far away before dealing with the rest of his opponents. He especially liked to extinguish flames, and he had a deep hatred for the fire elementals. Neptulin the Tidehunter was the ruler of water, lakes, rivers, and oceans. All water elementals and creatures that used water and cold as their main abilities would respect him. However, today, after 25,000 years, the saying, "a fallen phoenix is no better than a chicken," was used to describe Neptulin. Because he had died and revived once, his strength was no longer what it used to be. Otherwise, there was no way to explain how a mere sea monster could defeat him. In Warcraft, he was not even qualified to be the boss of a 5-man dungeon. From the fact that the final boss of the title throne was Azamat and not him, it was obvious how useless he was now. The great demigod of the weave, Duke Marcus. I, Neptulin, offer all my loyalty to you. From today onwards, your enemies are my enemies. My territory is your territory. It was good to talk to smart people. Stubbornly stubborn would only waste more effort. Smart, spineless people were the easiest to subdue. Duque first turned his body into ice elementals, then opened a portal. In the next moment, Duque's figure appeared in the tidal throne in the deep sea. There was almost no light in the dark sea. However, with his elemental senses, Duque could clearly sense everything around him. Vashj immediately offered Duque a portion of the elements here. Chapter 1840. 1%, 10%, 30%, 51%. The elemental share was the control of the entire water elemental world. In a sense, controlling more than half of the elemental world was equivalent to controlling a super reservoir. As a ruler, he could control how much water was released. It was like fish in a dry swamp or accumulating small amounts. An elemental world was a little different from a reservoir. It itself was like a huge nuclear reactor. The difference was that it did not flow out nuclear energy or electricity, but would continuously produce elements. This was why the elemental world overflowed with elements towards Azeroth and other planes since ancient times. Feeling that his soul touch had spread to more than half of the elemental world, including the tidal throne, when Duque absorbed 51% of the elemental share, he stopped. Master? Vashj was a little puzzled. Salagia, you take another 30%. Usually, I will give you an additional 10% of the usage. As for how you distribute it, that is your business. Yes. Vashj did as she was told. The eyes of Vashj's core subordinates all lit up. Unstable Hydas, Deepwater Lord Carathilas, Marogr Tidewalker, Yusler. They had followed Vashj for the longest 10,000 years, and the shortest was at least a few hundred years. What were they after? Wasn't it just more power, more territory, and more authority? Duque believed that Vashj could control this group of guys very well. Perhaps in time, there would be a few new water demigods born, thanks to the fact that the ancient god Enzos did not directly intervene in the affairs of the water elemental world. The elemental share here could be said to be quite complete. When Vashj killed Urzamat, she found it very funny. Urzamat actually took 40% of the elemental share and beat Neptulin, who had 30% of the elemental share, like a dog. The remaining 10% was left for Neptulin, and Duke Hydas's share was raised to 9%. The share of the entire water elemental world was decided in this way. Perhaps some people would ask why Vashj, who only had a little elemental share in the water elemental world, would beat Urzamat up? That was because the total amount of elements that Vashj controlled was higher. In fact, the Azeroth main world and the elemental world were two separate entities. The elemental concentration in the elemental world was undoubtedly the highest. Although the concentration was high, the total amount was small. The Azeroth main plane's elemental concentration was low, but the total amount was many times greater. It was as if the entire land of fire had descended into the main plane and only occupied the small southern foothills of Mount Hyjal. The water elemental realm was about the same size, just the size of Valshi. That was why Ragnaros and Alakir dreamed of occupying all the fire and wind elements on the main plane. Although the elements realm was the source of elements, the absolute quantity of elements in the main plane could also consume the pure elements in the elements realm. This was why Duque had applied to planet Azeroth's will to make Vashj a demigod under the direct jurisdiction of the planet. Having managed Lordamir Lake for so long, Vashj's cards were definitely better than Azamat and Neptulin, who had torn apart the water elemental plane. For Duque and Vashj, controlling the water elemental realm was equivalent to controlling the entire Azeroth water element from the source to the branches. Although the total amount of water element on the entire planet was too shocking, far beyond the scope of a demigod's control, having both the branches and the source was unimaginable. When the water elemental realm was completely integrated with the main plane, it was foreseeable that the share of water element would become more and more valuable. The law of nature was that the winner took all. Neptulin could, of course, sense that his old rival Ragnaros was already dead. Facing Duque, the super boss who destroyed Lager, controlled the fire elemental realm, and dominated the powerful demigod Vashj, Neptulin did not dare to even fart. He had to be a coward. The water elemental realm had completely changed. From today onwards, Duke would be the ruler of this place, while Vashj would rule over the tidal throne as Duke's representative, controlling this place. Master, I still have something important to do. Please let me report to Karazhan, Vashj said very respectfully. Okay. After Vashj arranged the defense here, it was actually a territory for the 4 water element masters under her. Then she and Duke returned to Karazhan through the portal. Although Vashj looked submissive on the outside, through the soul connection, Duke could clearly feel the excitement in her heart. Almost as soon as they stepped into the bedroom, Vashj turned back into the appearance of a high elf and wrapped around him like a beautiful snake. She clearly had a pair of long legs, but she gave Duke a soft and boneless feeling. Master, with a sickeningly sweet voice, Vashj displayed a kind of passion that did not match with a water element demigod. Duke unsheathed his godly sword, followed by sword drawing technique and sword return technique. The seemingly monotonous 2,888 consecutive stabs had an unimaginable fiery effect. In the end, Vashj, who overestimated herself and wanted to challenge Duke, ran out of stamina and was put to the ground, limp like mud. Duke raised his eyelids. This is your important matter? Nothing is more important than confirming Master's care for me. If Master doesn't trust me, then I will continue to be my personal maid. I don't want this water elemental realm. What Vashj said made sense and Duke was speechless. This was the difference in the way people thought because of their different backgrounds. Vashj, who was born as a noble but had been a maid for Queen Azhara in the palace for a long time, still had the habit of relying on the royal power or the strong. That was something that could not be changed. Just like in the original history, Vashj, who was once independent, finally found Illidan, the unreliable doc, just because she felt that Illidan was stronger than her and that there was a better future with Illidan. So she died tragically in the Serpent Shrine cavern. In this life, she saved her soul and saw Duke as the only salvation for her body and mind, so she became Duke. Duke's focus and desire were even above her personal wishes. Duke could not help but like this loyal dog-like attribute brought about by changing history. It was so worry-free. After being intimate with Vashj for an entire day and night, Duke suddenly received an unexpected visitor, Kale, that Sunstrider. Oh, what a rare guest. I didn't expect you to visit me. This was not a polite remark. Although Duke had helped Kale back then and Kale was very grateful to Duke for the sake of his subordinates, Kale had to create a small circle independent of the Alliance's power circle. This group of people was under orders from the Alliance, but also a bit like an organization like Silver Dawn, with a certain degree of independence. Chapter 1841. For the sake of that group of people, and not wanting to provoke the Windrunner family, which held the power of the Blood Elves, Kale, that's relationship with Duke was always a little ambiguous. Kaizi would accept any of Duke's arrangements or orders, but he rarely came to find Duke in private. Kale, that's glanced at Vashj, who was standing beside Duke and dressed like a maid, with a dignified bearing and lustful eyes. He seemed to be a little concerned, but he also seemed to be used to it. His reaction was a little strange. What? I've already reported Vashj's attack on the water elemental realm at the throne meeting. Duke found it strange. Kaizi sighed. No, I'm just a little envious of the trust between you two, master and servant. In the past, in the circle of high elven nobles, even husband and wife would have all kinds of dirty political deals or frame each other. Duke did not know how to continue the topic. Instead, it was Vashj who blushed, which was rare. Kaizi changed the topic, stood up and bowed deeply to Duke. When he looked up, he said in a straightforward manner, Duke, I'll also say it directly. I hope to offer my soul and loyalty to you. Needless to say, Duke was a little stunned. He wanted to say, you must be joking, right? But he immediately realized that Kaizi was unusually serious. What's wrong with Kaizi? Kale, that's continued, I spent the first half of my life as a prince. I used to think that seeking happiness for my compatriots and people was the whole meaning of my life. I've always encouraged myself with this. Unfortunately, my father's matter completely turned my world upside down. Duke did not say anything and let Kaizi continue. That was my father's sin, and also the sin of the Sunstrider surname. Since I'm a member of the Sunstrider, I don't regret it, nor do I blame my father. I calmly accepted this sin. I worked hard for a long time, hoping to still do something for my compatriots after removing the Sunstrider surname. Unfortunately, I discovered that Sylvanas Windrunner did a better job than I did. At this point, Kaizi sighed deeply. I'm at a loss. I'm at a loss for myself. I'm at a loss for those who believe in me and want to follow me to the death. We don't know where our future lies. Duque interrupted. You have already proved your determination and courage to fight against evil with your actions. Have you forgotten the cheers of the Blood Elves? Of course not. But we want to do more, not just for the Blood Elves, but also for this world that is constantly being invaded by evil. Because of this, my followers and I yearn for greater power. Duque frowned. You can't find your own path to power? Kale, that's became agitated and his voice became more sonorous. No, I found it. But this is the only path that suits me, and it requires your absolute trust. Duque realized what Kai-Z was referring to. Vashj, who was beside Duque, also had a fierce look in her eyes. As long as Duque gave her a look, she would not hesitate to attack Kale. Duque sat comfortably on the sofa and lay back down. His voice was a little unfathomable. You want the share of the fire elemental world that I control? I know it's shameless of me to make such a request as an outsider, but I don't have a better way, and I believe that this can solve the problem of my followers having similar symptoms of magic addiction in the future. So in exchange, my followers and I are willing to offer you all our souls. At this point, Kale, that's no longer bowed, but knelt down deeply to worship Duque. It had to be said that Kale, that was very accurate in this matter. Unlike in the fire elemental world, Duque did not have a capable assistant like Vashj in the fire elemental world. So Duque only symbolically gave Majordomo 5% and made him a manager. As for the other two guys, Sharnox, the fire demon hunter who had joined Duque in advance, gave him 3%. As for Madron, who would have become the fire elemental lord because he had chosen the tall among the short in history, that was too bad. I'll give you 1%, take it or leave it. Duque monopolized 91% of the shares and was in an absolute position of dominance. Duque's ambition was not just the fire elemental world. He had to at least take care of the arcane, fire, and frost elements to become a true god. He could not have so much energy to concentrate on managing the fire elemental world. It should be said that Majordomo was enough to manage it. The problem was that Majordomo was too weak. Even if he became a demigod, his combat power was still as high as 5 among demigods. Duque's real representative in the fire elemental world should be like Vashj, who could fight and had his deep trust. That was ideal. Kale, that's proposal scratched his itch. After all, at the end of the day, Duque could not absolutely trust Majordomo. That guy was forced to surrender by Duque. Since he could surrender to Duque, there was no guarantee that he could surrender to other powerhouses in the future. In this life, Kai-Z did not fall into a state of madness because of his clansmen. His pure heart was still worthy of praise. There was no need to say who the balance in his heart was leaning towards. Duque crossed his fingers and placed them on his knees. He pretended to think for a while before nodding in agreement. Okay, I agree. There are many people who are willing to offer their souls to me in exchange for power, but not many of them have character and will that I recognize. You happen to be one of the few, so I agree. Kale, that's kowtowed heavily and said loudly, Thank you, Master. I'll go and call my followers over to pay their respects to the Master. A few minutes later, Kai-Z brought a group of subordinates and filled Duque's reception room. Greetings, Master. Dozens of elves said in unison. Duque had to admit that Kale, that was quite popular. In addition, the nobles of the mages were quite unhappy with the power of the once lowly ranger faction. Not every mage who had lived for thousands of years and was used to being a big shot could condescend to be ordered around by the ranger faction. Therefore, a large number of mages joined Kale, With the help of the Weave, just Kai-Z's subordinates alone could form a new Silver Moon Council. From now on, Master will only have the great Weave demigod Duke Marcus. I, Kale, that's Sunstrider, and just one of Master's servants. Everyone please recognize your new identities. Kai-Z instructed. Yes. Dozens of people answered in unison. Kai-Z turned to Duque. Master, you can choose any one of them to be your guard or maid. Back then Kai-Z had given Duque an astromancer, Solarian. It was unknown if he was addicted to giving them away, or if the high elves had the habit of giving girls away. In any case, Duque was still a little uncomfortable. Chapter 1842. It felt like a dynasty before the Celestial Empire, where it was normal for rich families to give their concubines away. Interestingly, the moment Kai-Z said this, one of the 4 heavenly kings beside him, the astrologer Caponia, became anxious. She stared at Kai-Z anxiously, and then felt that it was inappropriate, so she secretly tugged on Kai-Z's sleeve. Kai Zi seemed to have come to his senses and wanted to change his words, but he did not dare to open his mouth and slap himself in the face. Duque wanted to laugh at the sight of the young couple. Duque looked like he was about to snatch someone's wife. Alright, I think Caponia is not bad. When Duque said Caponia's name, Kai Zi and Caponia felt completely disheartened, as if there was nothing left for them to live for. Kai Zi immediately reacted. Back then, because he lacked courage, he had knelt in front of his great lich father, who had sought refuge with the Calamity Army. This time he was not going to be timid anymore. He was going to say, no, loudly. Without paying attention to the second half of Duke's words, Kai Zi's body suddenly burst into flames and his whole body jumped up. Yes, he really jumped up. He was at least 5 to 6 centimeters off the ground. Wait, no. Caponia can't do it. When Kai Zi roared out loud, he felt as if a great river had burst its banks, and he could finally vent all the depression in his heart. Whoa, I did it. Caponia, I did it. Although I might not be able to step into the demigod realm for the rest of my life, at least I'm safe. Something's wrong. Kai Zi was already prepared to face Duque's thunderous rage. After all, he was the one who went back on his word. But why was Duque smiling evilly, his blood elf followers shocked and Caponia a little angry? Kale, that was dumbfounded. Duque leaned against the back of the sofa in satisfaction. He waved his hand and Vashj came over to massage his back. Dumuk repeated his words with a poisonous tongue that was bubbling up. Hey Kale, what do you mean by that? Just now I said, I think Caponia is not bad, why don't I bestow her as your wife? Then you actually said wait. No, not Caponia. Are you saying that you don't like Caponia and want to offer her to me as a maid to warm my bed? No, of course not. Actually, I like Caponia. Kai finally admitted shamefully. Duque's explanation of the cause and effect was so infuriating that several guys, including the 4 heavenly kings, were already snickering. At this time, how could Kai Zi not know that he was played by Duque? He thought that Duque, who was obsessed with elves, wouldn't die so easily and would let Caponia go. Subconsciously, he thought that his little lover had been sent away because of his slip of the tongue. In the end, he was the one who fell into Duque's trap. Kai Zi's face immediately turned red, and he scratched his head in distress, not knowing what to say. But now that he had said it, Kyle felt a sense of relief. Okay, tell me, how did you get together with her? Since his master had given the order, even if it was a little embarrassing, Kai Zi could only confess. Kai Zi and Caponia's relationship seemed to be a natural one. Ever since Kai Zi became a great traitor to the elves, his 4 advisors had never abandoned him. He didn't have many capable female mages around him. Originally there was the great astrologer Solarian. In order to help Kai Zi out, Solarian had volunteered to serve Duque. In a sense, this was also an opportunity. Duque had more or less put in more effort to help Kai Zi wash away the stigma of being a traitor. But this way Kai Zi would only be left with Caponia. It was easy to feel lonely away from home. In the long night, if he wasn't looking for someone to talk to, he would sink into loneliness. Back then, the 4 advisors were naturally the ones that Kai Zi talked to the most. Was it easier to talk to a few men, or was it easier to talk to a girl who was kind and understanding? As time went by, Caponia succeeded in getting the position. To be honest, if Duke was given a choice when he first arrived in Azeroth, he would probably choose the elves. Even Caponia might not be the best choice. Since he already had the famous 3 Windrunner sisters, why would he need other high elves? Just having the 3 Windrunner sisters was equivalent to having all the girls in the high elves. Not to mention Caponia, even Duque hadn't touched Solarian, who was a maid. Dumok wasn't a stud, so why would he lower himself to F***ck a girl who was a level lower? So, not only did Duque bless Kai Zi and Caponia, he also gave Kai Zi a 10% share of the Land of Fire elements. Here's your AO. I think the surrounding environment will be very suitable for you and your phoenix. Duque opened the 3D map of the Land of Fire and seemed to have given Kai Zi a piece of land. Kai Zi didn't see it at first, but when he saw it clearly, he immediately thanked him profusely. How could that place not be suitable? It turned out that it was the territory of Alyssa Razor, who had betrayed the Alliance and turned from a green dragon to a fire hawk. As a place to cultivate a pure-blooded fire hawk, it was also quite suitable to cultivate a phoenix. It could be foreseen that as long as Kai Zi displayed his talent and completely combined his power with his phoenixes, he would soon become a demigod of fire. After sending Kai Zi and the others away, Duque returned to the study and began to think while enjoying Vashj's verbal service. He thought that he should have accumulated enough capital to embark on the path of a true mage god after obtaining the control of all the elements in the water and fire elemental realms. The reason why Duque gave out his share so generously was that Duque had determined through the system elf that even if he took out 100% of the elements, including all the ice and fire elements in the elemental realm and the entire Azeroth, it still wouldn't be enough. To be specific, it wasn't a problem of quantity, but a serious lack of quality. What was annoying was that this was like a puzzle. If one piece was missing, he could still find out which piece was missing. But now it felt like at least half of it was missing. The rest that could be judged was like broken glass, all in strange shapes that people couldn't make heads or tails of. So, at this time a comfortable feeling came. After a while Vashti raised her head. "Master, what are you thinking about?" "Nothing, I'm just thinking about how I can become a true god. Everyone has improved, but I've been stuck at demigod for so long." Vashti laughed. "How could it be so easy? Before the ancient war, the white deer god Malorn had been stuck at the demigod realm for tens of thousands of years, but he still couldn't ascend. Let nature take its course." Duque was stunned. He thought about it and agreed. This kind of thing couldn't be rushed or forced. Then let nature take its course. Chapter 1843. Duque looked into the distance. With the help of the magician's eyes, he could see the situation near Oldham thousands of miles away. Servanas was a very proud man deep down in his bones. Without Duque, perhaps she would still be an arrogant elf in this life even if she did not become the undead queen. It was because she was venting her dissatisfaction at Duque while blowing Duque's pillow talk that Duque could not do anything to her. "When you peek at my battle, it makes me feel that you don't trust me. If you stay in the shadow behind me every time, ready to support me at any time, it will make me feel very useless." Before leaving to fight against AO Trash, Queen Sylvanas said this to Duque in a half-complaining tone. Duque really could not do anything to Queen Sylvanas. Some women were willing to give up everything without reservation. Some women always wanted to keep their own territory so that they could have a breathing space. Queen Sylvanas' independence and the pride that appeared from time to time was more like her trademark, even to the extent that it was already a part of her soul. Sometimes she would bring trouble to Duque, and sometimes she would surprise Duque. This always made Duque love and hate. Duque did not dare to directly look into the Wind God's throne. Unlike the great Screwlaga who only realized that the enemy was right in front of him, whether it was AO Trash or Queen Sylvanas, those who played with the wind element were extremely sensitive. As long as Duque dared to inject his arcane elements into the Wind God's throne, the two big bosses would definitely find out immediately. It was fine if Alakir found out anyway. Duque did not intend to let this guy live, but Queen Sylvanas. If he did not handle it well, there would be turmoil in the harem. Speaking of which, Queen Sylvanas was pregnant with Duque's child. A pregnant mother could not be provoked. Duque could only bitterly use the most secretive method to set up a batch of passive sensing tactics for the wind element. There was no way. Duque did no magic of the 6 major elements, but among the 3 elements of nature, holy and shadow, Duque was the weakest in nature. Not to mention that the nature element included wind, thunder and other branches. In front of the real demigod of wind, he was just an amateur. Fortunately, Duque also had his own unique skills. He could roughly judge the current situation of the battle based on the flow and proportion of the wind elements. "Oh, we've already passed the Wind Council?" Duque was a little surprised. The Wind Council was one of the 4 heavenly kings under Alakir. As the Lord of South Wind, Siamat, was imprisoned by the Nephesite, one of the 3 major tribes of Oldham, Alakir's deputies eagerly wanted to fill the power vacuum that appeared in the Wind Council. The remaining 3 members of the council were Anshel, the Lord of West Wind, who could heal his allies or poison his enemies with wind; Loash, the Lord of East Wind, who could grind the grandest mountains into dust with his wind; and Nishil, the Lord of North Wind, who had lost more lives than the other 3 combined. Doesn't it sound like the 3 counselors are pretty awesome? In reality, that was all there was to it. After all, the equipment dropped by the Wind Council was not that great. When Duque was still a player, the so-called random enchantment that dropped equipment caused many of his team members to bleed profusely. What really deserved Duque's attention was the change in the proportion of the wind elements. Duque sensitively discovered that the proportion of elements in the wind elemental realm had changed. In addition to Queen Sylvanas, who had already interfered, there were 2 more share controllers. They had a very similar but different aura to Queen Sylvanas. Duque almost immediately recognized that it was the aura of Aurelia and Sasha. Duque's heart leaped with joy. Territories needed to be managed, and blindly plundering and squeezing was not advisable. Obtaining enough elements also meant paying the corresponding responsibility. Just like how Duque chose Vashj as the representative of the water elemental realm and made Kaisi a trusted aide of the fire elemental realm. In the end, Queen Sylvanas still chose her sisters as her deputies. Of course, this made Duque feel gratified. At the same time, it also meant that Aurelia and Sasha also had the ability to hurt Al-Akir. Feeling the intense and frenzied movement of the wind elements, Duque could totally imagine how fierce the battle in the wind god's throne was. In fact, it was just as Duque imagined. After beating up the 3 idiots of the Wind Council, Queen Sylvanas used a small trick to deceive Al-Akir and did not immediately discover that the council was completely annihilated. This allowed Queen Sylvanas to recuperate and let her sisters come over to absorb the power and element share of the 2 Wind Lords. When the 3 sisters were done, Al-Akir, who felt that something was wrong, appeared. His figure was similar to Ragnaros. The huge amount of elements in his body made him extremely huge. His height alone was more than 10 stories high. The length and volume of his lower body were immeasurable because his lower body was a few layers of tornadoes that rotated clockwise or counterclockwise. The decoration on his upper body was a little ridiculous. Al-Akir had a purple bun that looked like a Hindustani. The purple bandage-like band covered almost his entire face. Only 2 flashing purple lights could be seen, which could be considered his eyes. The main parts of his body were covered with thick platinum armor. On the left and right shoulder plates, there were 2 flashing electric balls that emitted the power of violent thunder suspended in the air. Wrapped in purple silk ribbons with gold edges was a pair of pure wind elemental arms. Seeing Queen Sylvanas and her sisters, Al-Akir raised his arms angrily. Greedy and shameless mortals, not only do you want to step into the divine realm, but you also covet my throne and my power? Queen Sylvanas responded with contempt. Ah! You dare to collude with En-Zoth in order to obtain the rule of the entire Azeroth. Have you never thought that there would be a day when you would be counterattacked? I really admire your naivety. If the word naivety was used to describe a little girl, it would be a compliment. To describe a lord of elements who had lived for tens of thousands of years, it would be utter contempt. Queen Sylvanas easily provoked Al-Akir's anger. The wind element was not a good-tempered fellow. Al-Akir was not as irascible as Lager, but he was not far behind. Al-Akir would not be nice to a thief like Queen Sylvanas who wanted to seize the throne. Queen, let me help you. Gavinrad waved his wind sword and slashed at Al-Akir. Al-Akir suddenly flew into a rage. Son? Bastard human. Shameless human. How dare you use my son's power to attack me? Gust of wind. At first, Gavinrad did not understand why Al-Akir suddenly changed his target when he wanted to kill Queen Sylvanas first. But when he heard Al-Akir's angry roar, he realized that he was the one who caused trouble. Chapter 1844. Gavinrad had been playing with the wind sword for a long time. It was so long ago that Kirin had forgotten that Thunder Wrath, Windseeker's blessed sword, actually sealed Prince Thunderan's soul inside the sword and kept extracting the prince's power, hence the special effect of the wind sword. It wasn't his fault that he had forgotten. After all, this was one of the earliest divine weapons of the Alliance of Heroes. Who was Prince Thunderan? Wasn't it just Al-Akir's son? Using the power of his son's smash to slash his father didn't need to say anything. Gavinrad, who had never had enough aggro and was often not a good MT, pulled the aggro very well this time. What? Defensive knights were only good at pulling group monsters and not tanking the boss because they didn't have enough aggro? That was impossible. At least not this time. At this moment, whether it was the bitter comrade Gavinrad or Sylvanas, they both understood Dumuk's sinister intentions. Duque had promised not to interfere with Queen Sylvanas' threats and promises. Now it seemed that he wasn't just interfering, he was practically sticking his hands and feet into it. As a demigod of wind, Queen Sylvanas' physical attributes weren't greatly enhanced, at least in terms of vitality. Compared to her speed, magic, and attack power, her vitality wasn't even worth mentioning. It could be said that if Queen Sylvanas was hit hard by Al-Akir, she might not die, but Duque's unborn child might be finished. In a life-and-death battle of this level, how could Queen Sylvanas reduce her chances of getting hurt to zero? This wasn't a game where there was a main tank and defensive warrior to take most of the damage from the boss. In reality, bosses weren't stupid. They all had brains and wouldn't be affected by aggro-pulling skills like taunt or armor break. The boss would attack someone purely because they were a greater threat to him. Of course, there was one exception, and that was the true meaning of ridicule. Queen Sylvanas was here to seize power, so she would at most be considered an attempted crime. What about Gavinrad? He had witnesses and material evidence and could be directly convicted. Every bit of power in the wind sword in his hand came from the soul of Prince Thunderin, who was sealed in the sword. The prince's soul led the gathering of wind elements, which resulted in the wind sword's special effect. It could be said that every time Gavinrad swung the wind sword, it was as if the prince's soul was wailing. The whispers in other people's ears became terrible lines in Al-Akir's ears. The following content is purely a free translation of the distorted version. If there are any similarities, it is purely coincidental. Yamit. Papa, save me. So painful, sob sob sob. These voices sounded like they had been smashed by a grass mud horse 10,000 times, so Gavinrad was completely enraged. A powerful move sent Gavinrad flying into the sky. Well, it was like a home run flying out in one go. Above his head was a boundless azure sky. Beneath his feet was a boundless blue ocean. Gavinrad wasn't skydiving, he was skydiving. Gavinrad had never been afraid of anyone. Even if the two commanders of the Burning Legion were here, he would still dare to fight back. The premise was to keep his feet firmly planted on the ground. Had this guy ever been sent flying into the air and then completely freefall? Wah! Gavinrad was so scared that he almost sh*t himself. Help! I'm going to die. Not only that, Al-Akir's hatred was not appeased. His huge wind elemental hands pushed out continuously. It was a continuous stream of lightning arrows that were like Gatling guns. Streaks of long lightning radiance really looked like the tracer bullets of a machine gun, drawing out dazzling arcs of light in the bright sky. This was the aura that Gavinrad wouldn't stop until he was beaten to a pulp. Paladins were supposed to be a symbol of courage. Seeing this guy dancing and screaming, Queen Sylvanas was both amused and annoyed. She waved her hand, and the wind element that belonged to her instantly rolled out. Gavinrad felt like he was riding on the clouds. He made a big circle and actually flew back to the platform of the wind god throne. With the support of the demigod of wind, Queen Sylvanas, Gavinrad, who did not learn from his mistakes, shouted, "Let me tell you, this Thunder's Fury blessed sword of the Wind Seeker represents Prince Thunderin's blessing to me. Bullsh*t. Oh, Trash was enraged again. This time it was the ice storm that was like a Category 12 hurricane. The violent tornado swept up thousands of white clouds and gathered an extreme chill. It crashed violently into Gavinrad, the enemy who killed his son. F***ck% yen #at. Before Gavinrad could finish cursing, he was sent flying again. Air was the medium for transmitting sound. If the air became an irregular turbulence, then the transmission of sound would be impossible. The second half of Gavinrad's curse was eaten up by the ice storm. Queen Sylvanas and Gavinrad weren't the only ones who came to attack Al-Akir. The others held back their laughter and attacked Al-Akir, who didn't care about anything. This was especially so for Aurelia and Sasha. Every arrow that the sisters shot out would leave holes of various sizes on Al-Akir's body. If Trash was a human, they would have shot out bloody holes one after another on his body. It could be said that because Al-Akir attacked Gavinrad crazily, everyone had a stable environment to attack and output. This time, Gavinrad, who was sent flying, became a large ice block the size of a wardrobe. Through the bumpy surface of the ice, he could see that this guy had been sent flying with his arms and legs wide open. But in the next second, the ice block was crushed by Queen Sylvanas with a gust of wind. Gavinrad, whose lips were purple from the cold, was sent back by the wind. Gavinrad was furious too. He raised his wind sword and shouted, "Ha! Gavinrad, am back. Al-Akir, let me tell you, I am the unkillable cockroach that Duque mentioned. Although I don't know what a cockroach is." Before he could finish his words, he was sent flying again. No wind, no ice. This time it was lightning. Aura, 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 aura. The violent, lightning strike was launched from Al-Trash's hands. Even though Gavinrad had activated Holy Shield, the powerful natural elemental attack still broke through his Holy Light Shield. If it wasn't for Sally Whitemane's powerful healing spell at the last moment, he might have already died. Even so, there was still an unknown object that looked like a burnt corn or a dark paladin flying through the sky. "Queen Sylvanas, I'll call you Queen Sylvanas just like Duque. Can we make a deal? Don't send me back." Gavinrad was about to cry. Sylvanas said seriously, "Wind's return?" A minute later. No. I admit defeat. Please don't send me back." Wind return? I'm really going to die. A certain paladin was furious. Wind return? Chapter 1845. Anger was a double-edged sword. It could give people strength and explosive power, but it could also make people lose their rationality and judgment. Akir was not human, but he also had emotions, and that was enough. Gavin Rad was the poisonous bait that Duque had set up to feed to Al-Trash. Regardless of whether Al-Trash ate this poisonous bait, it would greatly distract him. Unless it was an existence without emotions, as long as it was an intelligent creature, it would be difficult for it to remain indifferent to the enemy who killed its children. Holy Knights were famous for being able to fight and take damage. Even though Gavin Rad seemed a little weak. As one of the remaining 5 Silver Saints, he had escaped the shackles of fate and escaped the fate of death from Arthas. After going through so many battles, his vitality and endurance were infinitely close to the demigod realm. With the support of so many healers and the storm armor that Queen Sylvanas secretly gave him, it was difficult for him to die even if he wanted to. It was just a little hard for him to keep getting beaten up. In fact, when Al-Akir chased after him, he had already accepted his fate. It was just that he would not feel good if he did not curse out loud. When Al-Akir woke up from his anger, it was already a little too late. The attackers led by the 3 Windrunner sisters and the Storm Warden Amarin took advantage of the time when he was beating Gavin Rad to quietly deplete 75% of his wind element. Elemental creatures did not have a specific pain system. Only damage that directly pierced the soul would cause them to be alert. However, the high-purity wind element that belonged to Al-Akir was actually his life force. With 3/4 of his life force gone, Al-Akir finally woke up. "You treacherous thieves! Wild wind, listen to my command, go with the wind, little bugs." Following Al-Akir's domineering declaration, an unprecedented storm swept through the sky. It was a terrifying storm that could cut rocks into pieces and pulverize bricks into gravel. Not only was there frost, but there was also terrifying lightning that danced like snakes. Amarin created a tornado that was independent of Al-Akir's power to protect everyone. The people were saved, but the platform that carried the Wind Council's Wind Lords suddenly collapsed. Many Alliance heroes screamed, especially heroines. It was easy to feel weak if one's feet were not firmly planted on the ground. The sudden feeling of weightlessness was torturous. For example, Sally was the one who shouted the loudest. From the Molten Core until now, Sally was an old member of the Alliance's hero squad. From a little girl to a slender and elegant young lady, Sally could be said to be a veteran. Unfortunately, some things just couldn't get used to, so she was the one who screamed the loudest. "Miss Sally, please stop screaming." Hajaron Minyi couldn't take it anymore. "In theory, Her Majesty the Windrunner Queen will save us soon. Of course, I have the slow fall spell. Why is Miss Whitemane going to become a mage?" Millhouse made a suggestion that was out of place. In fact, in the next second, Queen Sylvanas shouted. The eye of the storm, the stones that were supposed to fall rapidly due to gravity began to spin strangely in the air, trembling. Some of the tiny gravel even flew higher into the sky in defiance of gravity. Every mortal who was falling suddenly felt that there was something under their feet. With just a thought, the wind around their bodies all listened to their commands, moving them up, down, left, right, back and forth. Everyone, including Stormwatcher Amarin, realized that they could actually fly, and their speed was 300% of their normal movement speed. "This is the eye of the storm?" Amarin was a little shocked. "Ah, I can fly." Riadaline was very happy. "That's amazing." Solon and Leander were in awe. If not for the fact that they were facing a strong enemy, everyone would definitely enjoy the feeling of flying freely. "Gavin Rad, where are you going?" "I suddenly remembered that I have something urgent to do," a certain paladin said with a sobbing voice. Queen Sylvanas smirked, and with a wave of her hand, she grabbed Mr. Gavin Rad, who was trying to slip away and fly as far as he could. In fact, Queen Sylvanas' actions were a little redundant. Aulakar, who had woken up, was already suppressing his own unhappiness. He ignored the little bug Gavin Rad and focused on dealing with her. Only Queen Sylvanas could shake the source of his power. Lightning, lightning wand, lightning cloud, static shock. Aulakar used a series of lightning attacks from the wind elemental branch to beat the hero team into a sorry state. The attack speed of lightning was faster than the wind, and it was also harder to defend against. In order to avoid injury, Queen Sylvanas had to focus more and summon lightning to intercept Aulakar's lightning. Unknowingly, it had become a battle of attrition. As an attacker fighting in the enemy's formation, this was quite disadvantageous to Queen Sylvanas. After all, in the Wind God's throne, there were more wind elementals that listened to Aulakar's orders. If this continued, Queen Sylvanas would not be able to outlast Aulakar. At this time Aurelia and Sasha stepped forward. It had to be said that the female elf's thinking was a little strange. Before they had children they always wanted to have a child. Therefore the two sisters were not willing to risk their lives until the last moment. But after giving birth, the two sisters were even fiercer than the fiercest Queen Sylvanas. At this moment, they completely let go of their souls and forcefully plundered the share of the wind elemental here. They did not even let go of Queen Sylvanas' share. If it were someone else, Queen Sylvanas might have turned hostile. Sisters were sisters and there was nothing that they could not share. Seeing that she could not attack, Queen Sylvanas decisively gave up most of her wind elemental and transferred it to her sisters. In an instant the situation of the battle changed. It felt as if there were 4 demigods surrounding and attacking Alikar. It suddenly became Queen Sylvanas defending, while Aurelia, Sasha and Amalron were attacking. This kind of chaotic attack made Alikar at a loss. He was furious. He roared. He kept summoning wind, rain, thunder and lightning to attack his enemies in various forms. But he was the best example of 2 fists being unable to fight against 4 hands. The wind elemental that had gathered on his body was rapidly being sliced off inch by inch. It was a high-speed nibbling that could be seen with the naked eye. When the 2 dazzling balls of lightning on his shoulder armor became dim, the great lord of the wind elemental world, Alikar, was dead. Feeling the elemental authority surging toward her from all directions in the wind elemental world, Queen Sylvanas was overflowing with dominance and waved her hand. Everyone realized that many black spots were rising under their feet. Countless stone fragments that had fallen not long ago were rising against gravity. Thousands of stones gathered together, forming a huge floating island with a diameter of nearly 1 kilometer. Queen Sylvanas stood in the center of the floating island and announced loudly, "I announce. I, Sylvanas Windrunner, am the new lord of the wind elemental world." Chapter 1846. The voice of the elemental world attached to Azeroth could only be heard by the elemental world and elemental creatures in the same situation. For example, the various large and small elemental creatures in the Land of Fire and Tidal Throne that had been subdued. From Vashj and Kale, that's who stood at the top of the elemental world, to the second brothers like Majordomo and Caratheras, to the pitiful Smoldrin and Neptulin who could have been big bosses but were now just third brothers, and to the elemental creatures of various levels. Those who were truly ambitious had all kinds of thoughts. Neptulin and Smoldrin, who originally had some thoughts, immediately gave up on the rebellious thoughts. The situation was very clear now. Duke Marcus was aiming for the position of the Lord of the 4 elements. The fire, water and wind realms were all under Duke's control. Then needless to say, it was the earth elemental world's turn. Not long ago, when Neptulin saw the fire and wind realms enter Azeroth first, he was prepared to wait and see. Now, it seemed like he was simply sending himself to his death. In addition, the powerhouses closely related to the elements could also receive the news. The Guardians of Mount Hyjal and the Ring of the Earth, which were dedicated to quelling the anger of the elements, were all dumbfounded. Especially the Ring of the Earth. Originally, Hamuir and the others were still holding meetings day and night to discuss how to coax the various elemental masters so that they would not come out to cause trouble and return to their respective elemental worlds. Great, now they're all fucking traitors jumping over loyal officials. As long as the 3 elemental world masters gave an order, it would immediately turn into the 3 elemental worlds ganging up on the earth elemental world. The druids in the Ring of the Earth suddenly felt as if they had learned the way of nature for nothing. They were learning harmony and communication. On the other side, Duke was taking the way of the king. He directly used his fists to get rid of the troublemakers and subdue the troublemakers. When he became the boss, all the turmoil would be quelled. To put it more exaggeratedly, if Duke wanted to play a specific game, he could give a strict order. Other than the local neutral elemental creatures in Azeroth, the shamans would not be able to use any water, fire, or wind elements. There were no shamans in the Alliance. When the news spread that Queen Sindorii conquered the Wind God throne and became the queen of the wind elemental world, the whole kingdom of Sindorii rejoiced. Almost all the elves ran to the streets to celebrate, singing and dancing. It didn't matter if Queen Sylvanas was Duke's wife or not. In any case, not only did Queen Sylvanas become a semi-god, she had also become the queen of an entire world. Even the mage faction in the country had begun to discuss whether or not they should develop wind magic on a large scale. After all, their queen was practically the goddess of wind. It would be a waste not to use such a good resource. The Alliance's Duke controlled the water and fire elemental realms, appointed Kale, that's and Vashj as overseers, while Sylvanas controlled the wind elemental realm. Even though diehard Roar had a big heart, he still felt that it was a little unbearable. It was true that the beastmen played the berserker style, but while they revered the warrior class, the shaman's teachings were the true tradition. Shaman priests were not only respected professionals, but also the core of the tribe's military. Earth, water, fire, and wind, these four elements would be hard to bear, not to mention losing three of them at once. Without the water element there would be no healing magic. Without fire there would be no AoE attacks. Without wind. Just think about it, the legendary Wind Fury 9 consecutive strikes, of the earliest shamans. Without wind there would be no use. Once the shaman profession went up against the Alliance, it would immediately be useless. Diehard Roar fell into a rare long silence. On the other side, Duque had rushed to New Silvermoon City to welcome the triumphant return of Queen Sylvanas and her party as half a master. Before he could hug his three lovers for a long time, Gavin Rad rushed out like lightning and hugged Duque tightly. Duque's eyes were filled with the charred armor that this guy was wearing. Duque, I'm going to die. I don't want to live anymore. Back then, I blocked a knife for you, I withstood Lager's hammer for you, and now I've withstood 100 lightning strikes for your fiancé. My life is so bitter, sob sob sob. I'm old, maybe I won't make it soon. It would be strange if I really can't carry the leader. It was worth mentioning that Gavin Rad's acting was terrible. After howling for a long time, he couldn't even bear to use a few drops of eye drops. It was just a few lines over and over again. What he meant was, I've shed blood and tears for you, Boss Duque. Don't call me when you're fighting bosses in the future, and remember to call me when you're picking up cheap loot. Duque's facial muscles were stiff. He pretended to comfort Gavin Rad. Why don't I let you retire with honor like Mograine? I'll convince your wife to accept your women and illegitimate children outside. For my sake, your wife won't say anything. Gavin Rad's face instantly turned pale. He immediately stood up and thumped his chest armor. He decisively expressed his loyalty. Actually, I'm not even 50 yet. I think I can still fight for another 15 years. That was what he said, but his sorrowful eyes gave Duque goosebumps. Queen Sylvanas's cold voice came from behind him. The wind elemental realm will give you 1%. Gavin Rad immediately continued to howl. Boss, I've shed blood for you, 3%. Forget it if you don't want it. Her Majesty Sylvanas finally gave her verdict. I suddenly remembered that I have other important things to do. I won't stand in the way of your reunion, boss. Gavin Rad, who had gotten the benefits, left immediately. Queen Sylvanas was indifferent, but she actually uttered a classic line. Ha! Men, she flicked her long blonde hair gently. That disdainful look, that aura with its own background music, that arrogant demeanor, she was simply invincible. Did she become arrogant after taking control of the wind elemental realm? Duque bared his teeth, a little depressed. He had suppressed Queen Sylvanas a while ago. Why did she seem to be gaining momentum recently? In any case, he was the father of the child in her belly, and he was her public fiancé. It wasn't too much to give her a public hug, right? Faced with Duque, who opened his arms, Queen Sylvanas still hugged him. It was a warm hug as usual, but she whispered in Duque's ear, I'm angry. You put Gavin Rad in my team because you don't believe in my ability. Well, I really, humph? Forget it. Since you're going to be a father, you're so worried about us. I'll let you pass this time. After that, Queen Sylvanas secretly breathed in Duque's ear. Tonight, from behind, wow. That's a lot of information. You already know it's a daughter? Why is it a daughter again? By the way, are all demigods so awesome? You already know now. And from behind. Duque snickered. Chapter 1847. As the saying goes, a daughter is a father's lover in his previous life. A good daughter is very considerate. She might even say, I don't want to get married, I want to stay with my father forever. It's sweet to think about it. Son. Damn you. You'll know what differential treatment is when you have a son. If you accidentally press on a woman's hair, she'll yell at you. When that fat boy is born, he'll snatch away your special dumpling. His mother won't say anything even if he pulls and bites you. If you talk louder and disturb the son, you'll be sentenced to death. No matter how much trouble the son makes, he'll be acquitted. He'll say, if you run away, there'll be a man in the future. According to Queen Sylvanas's character, she'll cut you with a knife the next moment. It's definitely a good thing that she's pregnant. In the future, she'll inherit her mother's beauty, just like Aurelia and Sasha's daughter. Just like Annihilus and Atlanta, they'll definitely be as beautiful as their mother when they grow up. In theory they have different surnames. But are they the new Windrunner sisters? That night, Duque was a little annoyed. In the past, when he caught Queen Sylvanas, he'd occasionally say, "If you're so awesome, why don't you go to heaven?" Well, this time Queen Sylvanas was ready. She even had an oars pose. Just as Duque was about to swing his sword and mount her, she really flew. She stuck to the ceiling of the bedroom and refused to come down. "What do you mean by flying above my head?" Duque was angry. I'm scared." The fearless Queen Sylvanas actually had this kind of moment. This time it was Duque's turn to be annoyed. If Aurelia and Sasha hadn't become traitors and flown up to the bedroom to catch Queen Sylvanas, he didn't know what would have happened. After half a night, the three Windrunner sisters were finally dealt with. Facing Queen Sylvanas, who was pretending to be a corpse, Duque punched her but hard. "I shouldn't have spoiled you so much and let you be the demigod of wind. Now you're making trouble for me." Queen Sylvanas couldn't keep up the act and turned around. "Then what do you want? Take back my demigod status?" "No, I'm just asking, when will your pursuit of power end?" Duque's question made Sylvanas stare blankly for a moment, and then a little discouraged. I actually didn't think about it. Alright, I admit that I'm just unsatisfied. I can do whatever you think you can do. I just want to prove to the world that I, Sylvanas Windrunner, can still be strong and live a wonderful life without you, Duque." Without beating around the bush, Queen Sylvanas spoke her mind. At this time, Aurelia got up and touched her sister's nose. Even if you don't want to admit defeat, you should at least have a plan. You went to fight Alikir while you were pregnant, and you still dare to complain that Duque stuffed Gavin Rad in as insurance. The Windrunner family doesn't have such an ungrateful woman. Queen Sylvie knew that she had gone overboard after being scolded by her elder sister. She lowered her head and said, "I'm sorry, elder sister." "Sorry, Duque." Now that Queen Sylvanas had admitted defeat, Duque wasn't interested in scolding her anymore. "Right, Duque, what about you? How far do you want to pursue power?" Sasha came out of the blanket and asked with her head in her hand. "If I can defeat the Burning Legion with my current strength, it doesn't matter if I don't strengthen myself. I don't actually pursue power. I just want to protect the people and things that I cherish. That's why I'm working so hard." Duque was telling the truth. Duque started to tell the three sisters about his journey in life. At first he just didn't want to be turned into a ghoul. Because he was afraid, he cherished it. In order to protect everything he had, he worked hard. The more he had, the more he couldn't bear to part with it. Unknowingly he did more and better. It sounded a little ridiculous, but it was actually very simple. This kind of thinking and practice that extended from the small self to the big self, and even the whole world, was much easier to accept than those exaggerated big principles and big hero ideas. As time passed, the three sisters were stunned to find that their man had become an existence that the mortals in the entire world of Azeroth had to look up to. "Alright, I promise you, Duque, and I promise elder sister and third sister. After I destroy Nethereo this time, I'll give birth to the child and be a good queen of Sindorii. I'll no longer pursue the power that might lead to my destruction. In fact, I don't see any chance of advancement." Perhaps the last sentence was the key to Queen Sylvanas' words. So what? This time, although the Alliance showed great power and suppressed 3 elemental realms in one go. The 3 elemental realms weren't as powerful as before. In fact, the price paid by the Alliance was not small at all. At a high level, controlling the 3 major elemental realms was a huge gain. Duque expanded the weave and announced that even the mana consumption of frost elementals would be reduced by half permanently, which won the unanimous cheers and praise of the Pharaoh. For the middle and lower levels of the Alliance, the consumption was not small at all. The aftermath of the cataclysm had not subsided at all. That's right, the withdrawal of the rioting water, fire, and wind elemental creatures only prevented the disaster from further expanding. However, the damage caused by the previous earthquake had not been pacified. For example, the large-scale flood in the wetlands, the handling of the fissures in the Elven Forest, the Western Wilderness, Stranglethorn Vale, and other places. The expansion of the disaster had to be controlled first, then disaster relief, and then resumption of production and construction. Only when a new batch of food and products was produced could society be considered to be on the right track. Before that, to put it bluntly, they could only rely on the existing resources to survive. Under normal circumstances, it would take at least 3 to 5 years to restore the productivity before the cataclysm. This was especially true for food. No matter how much food was stored before, without new rice and wheat harvests, the people would still be muttering in their hearts. However, no one could compare to Duque, who had a wild imagination. There were now many new members in the factory of Iron Stove Castle. A dwarven blacksmith said in the common language, "We need to quench this thing. We need to maintain that temperature for about 5 minutes. Before this piece of steel deforms and cracks, we need to cool it quickly in water, which is water quenching. Do you understand what I mean?" A fire demon next to him understood and turned to a fire elemental with an inverted triangular body behind him. Then the fire elemental got to work. When the steel was heated and kept warm for a time, Naga, who was standing next to him, waved her hand. A water elemental came over and directly wrapped the piece of steel with its body. *Z, cooldown complete. Chapter 1848. At first, not just elemental creatures, even the dwarves couldn't adapt. This completely subverted their common sense of technology. Blast furnace? Boiler? No need. Water source? Cooling water? No need either. After mastering water, fire, and wind, the first invention Duque made was a brand new elemental industrial system. The furnace castle itself was a volcanic crater. The fire elementals used up, the fire elementals just went into the lava and came back. The water elementals weren't afraid either. Outside of the furnace castle was a snowy mountain. The fire demons and Naga that Duque controlled became the most important bridge between mortals and elemental creatures. Wind elementals, also known as air elementals, also played an important role in the Alliance's industrial system. In the largest wind tunnel laboratory in the furnace castle, in the past, they relied on diesel engines to pull the propellers to provide the wind needed for experiments. Now it was the air elementals that blew the wind. The experimenters could get as much wind as they wanted with just a word. The wind speed could be adjusted at will, even at different angles. In time, the Alliance's third-generation flying battleship would probably come out. It would be a hybrid flying battleship with a combination of traditional diesel propellers and wind elementals. Not only did it ensure safety, but it also took into account the new technology. The key was that it consumed less energy and had a better endurance. Not just industrial, but in agriculture, the addition of elemental creatures quickly subverted the image of elemental creatures in the eyes of civilians. The Alliance's propaganda was like this. In the past, the cruel elemental kings Ragnaros and Alikir controlled them to wreak havoc on the continent. Now that Duque became the king of water and fire elementals, the situation was reversed. In Loch Moden and the wetlands, this was originally the dwarves' largest food production base. Because of the collapse of the Boulder Dam, a large area of the wetlands was submerged, and Loch Moden began to lack water. Under normal circumstances, this year's food production in Loch Moden would be finished. But with water elementals, things were different. High-level water elemental elites were mobile medium-sized reservoirs. The dwarves commanded the Naga, and the Naga commanded the water elementals. Once they were controlled, not only did they open up a new water source in Loch Moden, in fact, the underground water that the dwarves didn't discover or couldn't handle before, they also rearranged the layout of the paddy fields in Loch Moden. In the wetlands, a group of muddy water elementals with sand and mud would run into a big puddle and squat. Water leads the way, sand and mud are left behind. It didn't matter how big the puddle was or whether there were dangerous creatures such as crocodiles in it. It turned into pieces of soft mud that were rich in water. At the very least, with a little tidying up, transporting some soil over, and then using a bulldozer to flatten it, it would immediately become a piece of fertile farmland. As long as Neltharion was settled and the Boulder Dam was rebuilt with cement, the wetlands would become a major grain-producing province in less than 2 years. It would be thousands of miles of fertile land that belonged to the dwarves. Not only the dwarves' territory but the entire Alliance's territory from the northernmost Sindorii kingdom all the way to the south, to Lordaeron, Stromgarde, Alterac, Gilnis, Dalagen, Stormwind, and finally Kurtiras, who had started building a new royal city in Stranglethorn Vale, were using the opportunity of the cataclysm to transform the landscape and carry out more scientific redevelopment of the land. Apart from the Night Elves who had always adhered to the doctrine of nature, all the races and kingdoms of the Alliance used this opportunity to reform themselves. At the throne meeting, someone asked, "Isn't there still Nesario who hasn't come out? What should we do if he attacks?" Duque said straightforwardly, "The reason why the cataclysm is called a cataclysm is that it was not something that could be done by Nesario or N'Zoth alone. This is a special effect produced by the combination of the 4 major elemental realms and Azeroth. Without the 4 major elemental realms working together to pull the elements of the world to resonate together, the destruction of the planet would have been impossible. What if Nesario attacks? Muradin looked a little cautious. Our hero squad and the Sleeping Dragon Temple will join forces to fight the attack immediately. Also, can a black dragon destroy nearly 10 million square miles of land at the same time? As soon as Duque said this, everyone suddenly understood. Azeroth was very large. Duque had just said square miles, which was the way the Chinese were used to. The total territory of the Alliance was about 20 to 30 million square kilometers. This was not bragging. The Elven Forest alone was 1,300 kilometers from east to west, and the widest part was more than 400 kilometers, with a total area of 330,000 square kilometers. Plus the Reedridge Mountains, the Western Wilderness, the Twilight Forest, the Upwind Path, the Swamp of Sorrows, and half of Stranglethorn Vale. Today, Stormwind alone had more than 2 million square kilometers of territory. The specific figures could not be calculated because no detailed geological survey had been done. The 7 human kingdoms, the territory of the 3 Hammer Dwarves, Nomarigan, the Night Elves Danasuska, and a small half of Kalimdor, the Blood Elves Sindorii, the Dreenei's Blue Mystic Island, and the enclaves of Northrend. One had to know that apart from the Dragonbone Waste and the Northwind Taiga, Northrend was basically the territory of the Alliance. The ratio of square miles to square kilometers was 1:58. 20 million square kilometers might be considered small. It was a pity that the Alliance now only had a population of more than 10 million. Even if the ice fields, mountains and wastelands were excluded, it was still a typical case of vast land but sparsely populated. The leaders of the Throne Conference could see that Duque was now a classic case of grasping the big and letting go of the small. As long as the overall situation was one, the losses of small places did not affect the overall situation. It could be foreseen that the places attacked by Nesario and his Twilight Dragons would definitely suffer losses. Under the surveillance of the magic net all over the world, once the densely populated areas of all the member states of the Alliance were attacked, they would definitely respond immediately. With Duque, a demigod of the magic net who was proficient in teleportation, it was completely possible to make the attackers suffer the consequences. Perhaps even their lives would be spared. Since the damage caused by the attack to the Alliance was limited, the Alliance could take advantage of the opportunity of the cataclysm, forcing the residents to migrate and carry out a comprehensive development. As long as the population, productivity, and resource development went up, even if some people died, it would still be a big gain in the overall situation. Jaina smiled. I'm impressed. You can turn a world-destroying cataclysm into an opportunity to promote the development of the Alliance in one go. Is this the so-called elemental economy? Jaina did not know that the term she had casually mentioned had actually set off a craze among economists and historians about the topic of elemental creatures promoting the development of science and technology. While he shifted his attention back to the internal affairs, Duke did not forget about the ongoing war. Through the Eridar Gemini, Duque learned a new piece of information. What? You're saying that the Horde didn't run into the Twilight Dragons Varian, Cenarion, and Sinestra when they attacked Twilight Fortress? Chapter 1849. Recently, Gemini had been sent to the Horde by Duque. Duque subconsciously believed that the rest of the Twilight Hammer was already N'Zotha's territory. If they were to enter a real cult with an evil god as a backdrop, Gemini would be defeated in no time. Duke didn't want Gemini to be secretly brainwashed or implanted with something unclean in her mind, only to end up harming himself. Therefore, Duque believed that this wasn't something Gemini should be involved in. Instead, the Horde was more suitable for Gemini. Gemini was indeed very successful. However, Brainless Roar didn't kill Variana, Serenaron, or Sinestra before taking over the Twilight Fortress. This news made Duque feel as disgusted as swallowing a fly. If Sinestra was there, even if the Horde could take over the Twilight Fortress, they would have to bleed to the last drop and use up all their strength. Unfortunately, Oni's mother wasn't there, which made Brainless Roar famous. That's right, Brainless Roar killed hundreds of thousands of Horde people and forced the other 4 races to leave. However, because he took over the Twilight Fortress and cut off the 2 heads of the traitor Gujar, he was still a great hero among the young orcs. So it's not time yet? Although Duque had messed with the goddess of fate countless times and was about to complete the great achievement of taming fate, fate would occasionally throw a tantrum at Duque, which made Duque feel like he couldn't completely understand it. Duque kept causing trouble, and fate's hand kept trying to fix the flow of fate. It felt like if he didn't intervene when the other party was about to die or when there was a big change in fate, it would be difficult to ruin the path of fate. Just like how Duque tried to kill Thrall when he was still a baby, but he didn't succeed. Master, do you want us to take advantage of the chaos in the Horde to control that grim totem, and have her assassinate Thrall? Queen Saloras suggested with a charming smile. The air suddenly froze. A terrifying pressure, as if the entire world was pressing down on them, instantly froze Gemini's body. This wasn't a simple soul suppression, nor was it the purest double purgatory of ice and fire elements. Instead, it was the feeling that every magic circuit in his body was completely controlled by Duque, and every organ in his body was under his control. Salolas found that there was a strange change in her vision. The vision of her left and right eyes was not connected. She immediately understood that her eyeballs were being forced to look with her left eye and to look with her right eye. She noticed that her sister, Aura's, was also in the same state. Duque was using such a terrifying and strange method to tell her that the Gemini twins were only his slaves. My puppet. Do whatever I tell you to do, but don't touch anything that you shouldn't do. We were wrong. Master, please spare my life. In the mouth that was still allowed to control itself, Gemini's lips spat out the same weak words. When she regained control of her body, Gemini was completely drenched as if she had been fished out of the water. After telling Gemini to get out of here, Duque fell into deep thought. At this time, Duque received a soul message from his mount. Duque sent a telepathic message over. Onyxia, I have something for you to do. At this time, Alexstrasza was preparing to hold a dragon meeting in the Wormrest Temple. Although Duque, the mortals, and the guardian Hygel formed by the god of the wilderness had joined forces to thwart the conspiracy of Lager and Alakir, the threat of the Twilight Hammer was still not eliminated. Therefore, the Red Dragon Queen Alexstrasza decided to convene the Dragon Kings and the Backbone to hold a meeting to deal with the Twilight Hammer. Before the meeting, Alexstrasza and Krasis communicated in the Ruby Temple at the bottom of the Wormrest Temple, but the meeting ended on bad terms. The Queen said, "The mortals have done too much to protect this world. After all, this cataclysm was caused by the traitor Nisario and Enzoth. We, the Wormrest Temple, cannot remain silent. I want to gather all the dragons and attack the believers of the Twilight Hammer on a global scale." Krasis was stunned. All the dragons, including the black dragons and blue dragons? Of course, they are also an important part of the Wormrest Temple. I think the blue dragons have not recovered from the loss of Maligos, so we should not send them out so hastily. Moreover, among the black dragons, Onyxia is the only black dragon who is willing to obey the orders of the Wormrest Temple. We should get rid of them. Could it be that the bronze dragons and green dragons also have their own missions? In the end, just like the previous times, only the Red Dragon Legion will charge and break through the enemy lines? Cleostras, you are too selfless. Nisario is the common enemy of the five-color dragons. I have decided to hold a meeting of the dragons as soon as possible. I will squeeze enough combat power from the various dragon kings. If this is the case, Your Majesty, please allow me to refuse to participate in the meeting. I don't think this is appropriate, and Duque has not sent us an application for joint operations. This means that he thinks that the alliance alone, with the power of the god of the wilderness at most, is enough to deal with the current situation. When it came to Duque, Alexstrasza was convinced, but she was also a little emotional. Pay attention. It is us five-color dragons, not mortals, who have been entrusted with the duty of guarding this planet by the Titans. It is an unexpected surprise for mortals and native creatures to contribute to the protection of this world, not an obligation. The only ones who have the obligation to protect are us dragons and the various guardians. Proudly raising her chin, the Queen ordered, "Cleostras, you don't have to go to the dragon meeting. You stay and protect the red dragon egg in the sanctum." "Yes, Your Majesty." Krasis lowered his dragon head. Alexstrasza spread her huge dragon wings that seemed to be able to cover a small town, spread them high, and disappeared from Krasis' sight in a few moments. She went to the top of the Wormrest Temple that towered into the clouds. It was not a simple flight. The Wormrest Temple had various layers of subspace defense. In fact, she had just passed through several spaces. Krasis curled up his body and did not even enter a state of pretend sleep. He could not help but think of Duque's report. As an old ally of the Wormrest Temple, Duque had always been very outstanding. This time, it was also him who reported the matter of the Twilight Dragon in advance. The Twilight Dragon. This was a dragon egg that could contaminate a normal five-color dragon, and then promote the transformation, so that a dragon that should have become a five-color dragon could mutate into a Twilight Dragon. This news made the Wormrest Temple highly vigilant, so there was the initiative of Krasis, the big boss of the Red Dragon clan, to personally guard the dragon egg. Worried, Krasus ordered the Red Dragon with a double-headed sword not far away, "Bring 3 more teams of Dragonians and half-dragons here." You're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.